All right, welcome to the Chairman's and Awards presentation panel for the Capital City Classic Fall Workshops 2020. We've got some great panelists here today. We're very excited for all the expertise they bring to us. So we're going to start out real quick with some introductions, get to know everybody.
Hello, my name is Sarah Wolf, and I am a senior on FRC Team 701, the Robobikes. I've been on this FRC team all 4 years of high school, but I've been involved in robotics at some level since 5th grade. Some fun facts about me: I presented Chairman's for 2 years now at 4 different competitions, including Houston, because we won at Davis in 2019, whoop whoop. But I've been presenting in PIT Awards since my freshman year, and I've won Engineering Inspiration twice with my team. I was also a Dean's List semifinalist last year.
Hi, I'm Jessica Fuller. I am a senior on Team 1902 Exploding Bacon. We won the World Chance Chairman's Award last year. I was a Chairman's presenter last year, and on my team, I am the Hall of Fame lead. I present our BBTIM, which is our Big Bacon Theory of Imagery and Marketing presentation. That's me.
Okay, hi, my name is Allison H, and I am a senior on the FRC team TT65, which is one of the only all-girls robotics team in the US. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys about how our team got into applying for the Chairman's Award, because before that we did not have a marketing department, so this is like a recently formed thing, but last year I was one of the Chairman's presenters. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Heimlich. I have been involved in FIRST for over 15 years now, though I like to joke since I was -4 months old, so a bit longer than that in some capacity. I did FLL for a number of years and then a little bit of FRC before my family moved to Australia, and we founded 3132, the first FRC team in Australia. Was part of the team for a number of years, first as a student and a chairman's presenter and a bunch of other stuff. And then I became an alum and mentor on the team up until last year. So I was there for our Hall of Fame win in 2017. I now mentor 971 Spartan Robotics in California, and I'm the lead entrepreneurship mentor there. I've won some awards, and they're on the slide.
All right, what's up, guys? My name is Eric Klein. I am currently an alumni relations mentor for Team 2412, the Robototes out of Bellevue, Washington. I've been in FIRST for about 8 total years, 6 years as a student, 2 years as a mentor now. Outside of FLL on FRC on 2412, I was the team captain, scouting lead, business lead, and I led our sales. As far as my experience with Chairman's, a little limited. I can talk to you guys, the teams out there that are just starting to get the Chairman's programs off the ground, because I was heavily involved with building 2412's first ever Chairman's presentation as I was graduating. And then outside of that, I have professional experience in sales, marketing, graphic design, the whole shebang. So if you guys have questions about general awards, talking to judges, making that perfect pitch, I can really help you out there.
All right, and then my name is Ellie B, and I will be your moderator today. I am a student on 1678, and I am 1678's chairman's lead. So I think we'll get started with a few questions for our panelists. How do you guys make sure that your whole team is ready to talk to judges at competition? Can start with anyone.
So one of the things that go ahead, Jessica.
Go ahead. Okay. So it's definitely very important to have the entire team involved in the chairman's process to some extent. I know for a lot of teams it can be a struggle to get some of the more robotics heavy team members involved in this. But it's definitely important to have everyone in the pit qualified to speak to a judge. And how we do this is we train students a little bit in public speaking. Some part of that is our outreach. At outreach events, it's a great way to practice talking to new people about first and about your team, because you'll be basically giving them the pitch that you would be giving the judges. We also have resources in our pit, which makes it easier for kids to talk to the judges. For example, we have posters up about our programs and outreach. We keep a packet of the judges packet in our pit so that if a judge asks a specific question, the students will be able to flip to resources to be able to answer that question. And we always make sure there's at least one person in the pit who is well versed on subjects that judges might ask about, so that if the student really doesn't know, they can direct the judge to someone who does know, because it's never a good idea to just say, I don't know, and then the judge walks away and miss that opportunity. You always want to direct the judge to someone who might know. Even if it makes you look a little bit less knowledgeable, the alternative is way worse.
So one of the things that we would always do on 3132, and we still do, is we have fun Fridays. So Friday night is our normal team meeting during off season. So everyone's there on Friday, even during build season, because that's when we normally meet in the off season. And we play games. So it would either be a potluck, everyone would bring something in, or eventually the parents started bringing in dinner, and we would all sit in the kitchen area and we would play trivia games. Jeopardy is a favorite of ours, so we would have a whole Jeopardy board set up, and the students would pair off into teams, and they could bribe mentors to join their team. And then we would play a full game of Jeopardy, which is just a lot of fun, and it becomes an easy way for people to learn about it. And instead of it feeling like this chore and oh, you have to read all this stuff, or oh, you have to sit through this presentation, it becomes engaging and everyone wants to win, because oftentimes there'd even be a prize for winning.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and add in a little bit. Something that we do on 2412, because it is so tough to try and get every single person on your team, especially for the bigger teams out there, to be well versed in everything about the robot and everything about your business plan and all that jazz. What we do is we try and pick 3 to 6 of the biggest, most important parts of your team that year, and that's technical, that's business plan, that's outreach, that's chairman's, there's a whole shebang. You pick 3 to 6 of the most important things and make sure that every single member can talk about that at length. Why we do that is because when the judges come around, there's only so many awards they're asking questions for, and the questions are usually the same from year to year, or at least very similar. And so when they ask a question about imagery and you've trained your team members to understand that your turret for that year is the most impressive part of your robot when it comes to imagery design or quality or whatever, then they're really knowledgeable on that subject and they can pivot that question towards the turret. If they ask about imagery and you've trained them on the business plan, they know a lot about the business plan and its imagery details, then they can pivot to that subject. And so picking 3 to 6 items and making sure they're really well trained on those items rather than the awards themselves allows them to talk at length about them.
Yeah, something that I would like to add, just as a team member and as someone who's presented for Engineering Inspiration for 4 years now, or 3 years, it would be 4 this year. Speaking from experience is always the best course of action. So even if your freshmen don't know about a summer camp that you ran on your team 5 years ago, if a judge comes up and says, tell me about your outreach, every single one of your team members should have been to an outreach event, and they can talk about their experience of that outreach event and how it changed them and how it changed the people that they were working with. And that's always something good to bring up.
Another question that kind of goes along with that is, how do you guys think is the best way to set up your pit to optimize presentations to judges? So I think that can be either resources in your pit or specific pit display items, other things like that.
I'll go ahead and start. So what our team has that I really, really love is we have a custom banner every year that we put outside of our pit. It's really, really nice. We order it from like banner.com or something, but we always put our leadership team as kind of in a leadership structure because judges typically ask about leadership. And then we put pictures from different outreach events so that when we're talking about our trip to China or a summer camp that we once ran, we can point to the pictures and judges can see us directly making an impact. And it's not just like, here's some words that explain, it's actual pictures. And that's always nice to have.
Also, another thing, like in addition to posters and anything else you might have, we have like a judging pamphlet, which is like a shortened version of our business plan. So in that, you'd have like the most important achievements that your team has done over the year, which for us, we also went to China and mentored and helped some teams there. So it's always important to include like a visual aspect as well.
So coming from Australia to competitions in the US, we always had a little bit of a challenge on this one, right? Big banners and the like are hard to put on planes. And you don't want your crate to be overly heavy because then you have to pay for overage. So this was always a challenge for us. Our pits are functional. They are not beautiful. And I think it's important to remember that at the end of the day, right, the pit is not just for judging, but it's also for your robot. And so you don't want to have something great and amazing and beautiful and crazy that's going to get in the way of your robot team and your pit crew being able to service the robot and get it out for your next match. So there is a balancing act to play here, and we definitely went with simple because we had to. But I think the most important thing in our pit was we would have 3 different things that we'd give, well, technically 4, we'd give to judges. We had our big books that would just stay in the pit. They're about yay big. And that's everything the team has ever done. Then we'd have the books we'd actually give to the judges, and there were 2 versions of that, one for outreach, one for robot, and they were yay thick, just, spiral bound. And then we'd also have a 1-pager. And so we would be talking to those and bringing up different pieces and elements of those as we were talking to the judges. So it was just something in our hands and the students' hands rather than, something big and flashy just because that wasn't practical for us.
Yeah, Sarah brought up a really good point about the pit, and there is a balancing act of like how do you go for like beauty at the same time remaining very functional. And I would say 2412 took a pretty different approach than Sarah did. We went all in on making our pit as presentable as possible. In our minds, the pit was our moneymaker, and so we didn't. Luckily we don't have to travel, and so our situations are a bit different, but we really focused on how can we make the experience for a judge coming into our pit as optimal as possible to show off like the very best of our team and exactly what we can do. So the pit is designed fully by students in CAD. We have the CAD model for the pit sitting in the very front of the pit. We also have our judges booklet, which is something similar to what you guys do, which is every single thing, those 6 items that I was talking about, is documented in there with pictures. So if the robot's not there, we can just flip to a page about our turret and show it off. We usually have backup pieces. If the turret breaks, we have a second turret we can pop on the robot. We keep that on hand so that way we can show that, hey, look what our turret looks like if it were on the robot. Another thing we do is we keep on strap one item that we have developed across the entire season. So something that went through at least 5 design iterations. So we show that off and say, look how we develop our robot throughout the season and not just sit with like the same design that we had at the beginning of the year. That and put someone at the front of your pit at all times. We usually have one salesperson that sits at the front, and their job is either talk to scouts or talk to judges. And they swap out, but those are the most knowledgeable persons on the team that can talk about everything to do with the team. And they kind of welcome the judge in and then, turn around and grab maybe the driver to come talk to the judge or something like that about specific engineering items.
Yeah, I just wanted to add real quick. For 1678, we just recently redid our pit display, and we've found it really, it's been a really good thing for us to have our CAD model. We just recently got like a pit display that's like more of a computer style thing, and having CAD models of all of our different mechanisms on that pit display has been really helpful for us in not only talking to judges, but also talking to other students from other teams who are interested in our robot, because then our robot does not have to be there at all times. And so if you are looking to explain something technical and you can't necessarily point to the robot directly, a CAD model has been super helpful for us. To move on to another question, what's the most important part of your pitch to a judge?
So I guess I'll get started on this one. I think that it really depends on your team. There is no one answer to this. It really depends on what your team's strengths are, and you want to highlight those. So oftentimes when we were putting together a submission, we would talk about numbers and statistics, but also stories. And so, it's great to have the big numbers, but not every team has them, and not every team needs them, to be really honest, to win Chairman's Award, especially with the new questions that have come out this year, which if you haven't seen, I highly encourage you to look at. And so, you want to, but if you have them, you want to say them, right? If you've reached 10 million people, you want to say that. If you've been to 120 countries, you want to say that. But you also don't want to lose the stories. And I'll give an example of this. The year we won Chairman's, we had a line in the presentation. It was from one of the students, and that year we'd done a lot of work with water safety charities, which is really important here in Australia. We're, an island nation, lots of water. And so one of the students on the Chairman's presentation team was really passionate about this. And it turns out the reason she was so passionate about it is when she was 12, she'd saved her sister from a riptide. And that was what some of our work had focused on, was riptide safety. And so she told that story in the judging room. And later on, we were doing a chairman's panel similar to this, and there was one of the championship chairman's judges on the panel with us. And I told this story about how, we had this really powerful story from this girl. It was really great. And he said, hang on, I'm going to have to stop you there, Sarah. I was your chairman's judge, and a year later, I still remember that story. So never doubt the power of having a really important, impactful story in there. And that impact isn't just statistics. It can also be the individual stories.
Okay, I'm just gonna go now. So I think with this year's circumstances, focusing on just your writing supplements and video would probably be better than, because the pit for us is not really an option since I live in New York and competition is completely virtual this year. So I would just focus on the writing and video this year. But for the pit, I think just the energy of the whole team would probably be the most important thing to judges. When they see your team, they want to see that people are excited to be in robotics, that they have stories to tell, that their experience on the team really made them grow as a person. So our team did actually win Engineering Inspiration, and it was because we cheered every single time. We always have really good energy throughout the competition. And I also created a team model for our team. I think a team model is probably important as well, which shows how your team kind of represents the values of FIRST.
Yeah, something we've always talked about on 1678 in relation to talking to judges in the pit is that we always want to be talking about our future plans, and oh yeah, we've done this, but we also know that we're going to do this in the future, and we're always striving to do more. And I think that's really what we on 1678 have thought is our most important part of talking to judges. What strategies do you use to get information across to judges in the short amount of time you have?
I would say you got to have your ideas pre-prepared. You should know what you're going to talk about before the judge shows up. Every student should have those 6 ideas in their head, and have the booklet ready to go to show those off. That's the most effective way. You don't want to dilly-dally thinking about how does this question best fit our team? you should be comfortable with, what are they going to come up with and how are you going to best show off your team. Having those ideas in your head before they get to the pit is the best way to do it.
I think too, if you start with your most exciting outreach ventures, then the judges are more compelled to stay. So we typically start again with like trips to China and like really, really big outreach things. And then the judges will be like, oh, that's super cool. What else do you do? And then they'll keep asking, what else do you do? What else do you do? So as long as you stay interesting and you talk fast, then you should be able to get everything across.
Awesome. I think we're going to move on to a few more chairman-centered questions for a little bit. How does your team approach the written submission? So that would be the essay and executive summary. What are your strategies for like getting that started?
One strategy that my team has for approaching the essay is we separated our essay into the different topics that we wanted to talk about. So in our case, it was our programs and our different big outreach. And our goal was to get across the big message of our presentation, which is the impact that it made on the community and on the world, and get in all of the information that we can't fit into the presentation because there's not enough time in there. And although there is a word limit on the essay, you can get in a lot more facts and figures and statistics about your programs, like how many impressions they get on social media, how many people you've impacted, how many countries, how many counties in your area, that you wouldn't be able to get out in your presentation because there's just not enough time. And most importantly, you want to make it clear that the big picture impact that all of your programs combined are having on your community and on the world.
So I think there's a couple pieces to this one. The first one is the essay should not be thought of in isolation, right? It's a piece of a puzzle that is your submission. And this year with the new executive questions, those short answer questions, I'd really encourage teams to look at them earlier rather than later. They are very different than they have been in the past. I think there's like 5 questions that basically got smushed into one. There's 4 new questions that are totally different. And they've really gone from being centered around how has your team started other first teams and mentored them to being more about that overarching community, global culture change. They're a really great opportunity, I think, just for even reflection. Even if your team isn't going to submit for chairman this year, even if you aren't registering this year, I think it's a really great way for you to look at your team holistically and figure out where are your strengths and where are your weaknesses. Having said that, going back to my point about it being a puzzle, I think you can't just think about the essay in isolation. You need to think about all of the pieces and what you're going to put where. I would reiterate what Jessica said. The essay is a really great place to put those statistics, those hard numbers. And I think the presentation is a much better place to put those stories because it's your one chance to look the judges in the eye. Does that mean that your presentation shouldn't have any statistics? No. Does that mean your essay shouldn't have any stories? No. It's a balancing act. And so you need to figure out how that whole puzzle comes together to form a cohesive story.
I think one of the benefits of having like a designated team of people for marketing and for writing is that they join a team because they love to write, and even though they might not have that much prior experience, we like to train our rookies by just giving them information from a business plan and like letting them view the prompts so that they can like get a feel of what needs to be answered. So then we create like a bunch of rough drafts and we just continue to condense down the information so that the statistics are like really clear and it just answers the question as best as possible, basically. So I think training your team not to just be like really robotics focused, but to also encourage them to express their anecdotes and ideas as best as possible is really important. So another aspect that we try to do is like talk to different departments, talk to different members of each department because they probably have different experiences. And then we try to incorporate that into our writing prompts as well, in addition to like facts and just future goals.
I think that kind of brings up another question for me, but how do each of your teams structure the people who work on your chairman's submission? Like, do you have your own like designated group of people that work on it? Is it kind of a conglomeration of people from across the team? How are you guys structuring that?
So 701 is a pretty medium to big size team with a very, very small operations team. And so the past couple of years, it's kind of been the same 3 or 4 people working on the chairman's essay. But we're trying to change that. You know, we're trying to make it more of a team effort because I think chairman's is a team award and it should be worked on by the entire team. But currently, we just have a small team of people working on it.
So I want to jump in here. I think there's a distinction between working on the submission and working on chairman's, right? So any outreach activity that your team does is a great way for your team to work on chairman's, and everyone should be involved with that. On 3132, at least, not everyone was directly involved with the submission process because they don't enjoy writing, they don't enjoy presenting, and that's okay. To be honest, we would normally have one student write it because we thought it was easiest to have one voice, and then a whole bunch of people would be in the editing process. So that was actually my sister, Jay. She has a number of presentations on chairman's. They're great. You should go watch them. But basically around Christmas, she would go into her room, a lot of Tim Tams and other treats would go in, and about a week later, a chairman's essay that was about 20,000 characters would come out. And then a whole lot of editing took it up to probably 40,000 characters, and then a whole lot more editing brought it down to 10,000. So that was kind of our process, a little different, it sounds like.
For my team, we have a dedicated chairman's team, which is 4 or 5 students and a couple of business-oriented mentors. But as both Sarahs were saying, definitely the whole team is involved in the editing process. We put it up on Slack, which is our main communications app, and it's on the shared drive for anyone to access so that anyone can pop in and make comments, and we highly encourage that because, once again, it is important to have everyone involved because it's the team's voice. But if you just leave it up for the whole team to do and no one takes charge, it will end up just not getting done. So I think it's important to have it, if you're really going for chairmans, to have a dedicated chairman's sub-team. And there's a balance to find definitely between getting things done and having the entire team, or as much of the team as you can, involved in it. And you need to find your team's balance for that.
I have a small note to add, but also give your essay to your English teachers. They are there for a reason, and even though they'll tell you to spell out STEM or FRC instead of using an acronym, you could ignore those, but they do a really great job at getting you to cut out irrelevant information and fixing your grammar. So that's something that we've also found useful.
Yeah, in the past, for our essay, we've sent, I know a few of you guys here, we've sent our essay to your teams, and we really think it's important to get feedback from as many people as possible. So we have like a deadline for our essay of Thanksgiving break, and then after Thanksgiving break, we are entirely editing our essay and sending it out to literally as many people, as many like friends on FRC teams, people's moms, like all over the place, to just get as many eyes to look over our essay and make sure that not only people inside FRC will be able to understand it, but also someone who has no experience whatsoever with FRC could understand what each of our programs are doing and why they're important. To move on to another question, what do judges look for in presenters? What do you think is like the most important qualities in chairman's presenters, and how does your team choose their presenters?
I'll start again. The biggest note that we've gotten from our team in a positive way is energy. When we won chairman's at Davis, after we were done presenting and answering questions before we left the room, the judges looked at us and they said, the one thing that we always look into in 701 and the one thing that we always notice is how excited and happy and energetic you are when you walk into the judges room. And so when you're choosing chairman's presenters, it's important to make sure that they want to do it and they would be excited when walking into that judges room, because it really does make a difference. If you're like dancing and cheering when you're walking, judges are going to be excited to see it. And then also for just choosing presenter, we just go with whoever worked most on the essay, because they're typically the ones that have the most knowledge and can best the questions.
I agree that energy is a big part of being a good presenter, and I think something that goes with that is the chemistry of your team. You need to make sure that your presenters, this might seem obvious, but that they actually get along and that they like each other. Not even that, but some people can like each other and not necessarily have good chemistry when presenting. As Sarah said, our presenters were the one who worked the most on the essay, and someone who had worked on chairman's team very thoroughly the last year and also that year. But as well as that, we also had auditions for the last presenter slot, which is how I got onto the presentation team. So they just did auditions with the two people that they knew were going to be chairman's presenters, and a couple of mentors were judging. We ran through the year previous script and asked a couple of questions, and they were just looking for general speaking ability, so you don't stumble over your words too much, you don't like jump around a lot, you can clearly communicate your thoughts, and also, as I said before, the chemistry with the other presenters was very important.
Just like building off of that, I think that you shouldn't choose only seniors to present, even though they might have the most experience. Like, I was chosen because I did work on the essay, but there were also two other presenters, and one was from engineering and the other one was from programming, and one of them was a sophomore. So I think experience and presentation skills shouldn't completely just dominate who you choose to present. It should be a thing that people pass on throughout the years, because chairman's is like a long-term goal. It's definitely not something you can do in a year or two, because you need to build up a reservoir of achievements and goals to talk about. So that's what our team decides to focus on, which is just chairman's is like a long-term goal, and to just keep working towards it.
Yeah, I think turnover is super important. Last year, on 1678, we actually had an entirely new presentation team because most of our presenters had graduated the year before, and it was a really big challenge for us figuring out how to do that turnover. So this year, even though we had some people who interviewed for presentation team that were really strong, we chose to go with someone who was actually a year younger, because we didn't want every single person on our presentation team to be the same age. And it sounds a little harsh when I'm saying it, oh no, you can't be on presentation team because you're a year older than we think you should be. But our candidate was super strong, and she was neck and neck with one other girl who was a junior, and she was a sophomore. And we actually ended up going with the sophomore because we want to make sure that when our current juniors graduate, we have people on the presentation team who know what's going on, because I think it's super important when you walk into the judging room that your presenters are confident and they know what's going on. And so having a bunch of brand new presenters can provide a really big challenge sometimes with that. So making sure that your turnover from year to year, you always have someone on the presentation team who has been in that room before is super important. What advice do you have for a team looking to expand their programs beyond their team?
So I gave a presentation about this at last Capital City Classic. I'd recommend going and watching that to get started. I guess TLDR version of it is figure out what makes your team excited. You know, I think we have this view of outreach that it's going and helping at a soup kitchen or doing presentations or going to China, and all of those things can be outreach, but none of those things have to be outreach. So figure out what your team is excited about and go do that. You know, the example I love to give of this is 125, who goes and they made blankets for their local dog shelter because they had some students who were really passionate about animals. Like, I think that's just a great example of taking something you're passionate about and turning it into an outreach project. So brainstorm, be creative.
If you're really looking to expand your programs and you're kind of wondering where to start, or you feel like you're stuck and you don't really know where to branch off to, a great resource is any connections that you have. So anyone in First or outside of First who you think would have connections to opportunities for new outreach or expanding your outreach. An example on Exploding Bacon is our Spark Kits, which are little shoebox-sized resource kits that we send to countries with less resources so their kids can learn science in schools. That program would be nothing without all of the connections that we have that helped us actually get those kids out there. And that ranged from teams, a China team who was traveling over here that we were able to give some kits to so they could take back to their country, to a kid who was going on a vacation to a different country, and we dropped off some kits with them before they left, and they were able to get those kids to that different country. So you can reach out on social media to people who might be able to help you, anyone that you've met at competitions. I would suggest starting there.
How do you balance robot building and other technical aspects with your outreach and Sherman's program?
I would say just to like highlight. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I'm not sure what the question was exactly, but I would just say that in every robotics team, there's always like a super big focus on STEM. So it's great that there's a marketing department or like a aspect to robotics as well. So outreach for us, we started by emailing a bunch of teams in our area, like middle schools, so we could start building a new team at one of the robotics teams. So I would just like look for a community or like a lack of community actually around your school. So in the Bronx, there's not a lot of opportunities for middle schoolers to get into robotics. So we started off by emailing a bunch of middle schoolers or like securing grants, and that's like a way you could build a team if there isn't a team there, or like you can search for teams in your local area and just start like building a relationship with them so you can mentor them as well.
One of the things I'm very passionate about as a mentor is that we don't want to just create the best engineers, but we are trying to create the next generation of the best possible citizens. And that's about so much more than just the STEM skills you're going to get in First. You know, I have always done the outreach and awards. on my team. I've done some of the technical stuff as well, but from the time I was a freshman all the way through my mentoring career, that's what I've loved doing. But in the real world, I am a software engineer, and the skills that I have gained by doing chairman's and outreach are actually directly applicable still in my work. I still have to write design docs. I have to give presentations. I have to give presentations to customers and to my boss and to his boss. And so those skills are going to be so valuable to you. So if you are a student watching this and you want to go and be an engineer, I would highly encourage you to get involved in the outreach side of your team, because it's going to make you more hireable. It's going to make university easier. Every time there was a presentation at college, it was so easy comparably because I'd done it so many times. It's going to make you a better employee, and it's just going to help you be a more well-rounded individual, which is what companies are truly looking for. So I think that, just as you have to balance it in your work life, you also need to learn how to balance it in your first life, and it will make you a much more well-rounded individual.
Yeah, I mean, going to the question about how do you balance robotics versus awards or outreach or business is, Sarah has a great point that I really agree with, and I won't repeat it, but just robotics is not just about engineering. It's about developing yourself as a human, and your mission statement most likely has something beyond just being good at STEM. It's probably something about ours says producing workforce ready members is how we like to phrase developing our students beyond just knowing what a RoboRio is. As far as separating it, this sounds kind of weird because you don't always think you're doing it, but don't ostracize students that want to do non-robotics things. On our team, we prioritize in our marketing non-robotics related things. So when we produce a poster, it says at the very top, like art and design, graphic design, maybe it says business plan development, stuff like that. When we go talk to students in our school, we go to the DECA club. We go to, the history classroom, stuff like that. Everyone already knows that there's a robotics team and you can learn how to do robotics. It's if you want students that are going to do business and you want students that can help you with your graphic design, with your imagery, with things that aren't related to robotics, you need to go and talk to those students and really connect with them and show them that that robotics is for them. And then create teams for it. When you're trying to make sure that you're developing a business plan while also building your robot, it shouldn't be the same students doing everything. They can only focus on so much. There are students at the same time as them being members of your team. And so you need to make sure that you have people dedicated there that are they don't want to be engineers. They want to go into business when they go into college and into the field. And so they show up every day and they go into another room and they sit down at the computer with their team and they focus on the business plan. And, that's their job. And that's how you make sure that both things are getting done really, really well, rather than 50% on each.
It's definitely important to have dedicated sub-teams for each. I think it's equally important that those sub-teams communicate with each other, because at the end of the day, if your mechanical sub-team has no idea what your business sub-team is doing when they're holed up in that room writing grants, there's not going to be good communication on either side. And when you actually have to come together to do something that involves the whole team or something big like the chairman's award and the chairman's documents, you're kind of going to fall apart in that aspect. So it's great to have dedicated sub-teams so that more work gets done, but make sure that they communicate with each other and they're constantly updating each other on what the other is doing.
Yeah, I also think that the technical aspects and the chairman's aspects they're definitely not mutually exclusive. So just kind of making sure that on 1678, every single student on our team, no matter if they're on a sub team or a non-technical sub team, is required to do outreach, to go to a certain number of outreach events every year, because we want every single one of our students to understand that this team is about more than the robot. And because of the outreach and things like that, our team can get so much farther than if it was just a bunch of high schoolers sitting in a room building a robot. And so I think it also, by making sure that all students are kind of understanding and having a part in our outreach, it makes it feel a lot more like a team effort. Like if we win an award, it feels a lot more like our whole team is celebrating together because we all know that we put effort into it, rather than like, oh, these like 10 kids that are on the chairman's sub team are celebrating when we win a chairman's award. It's like more of a whole team, like cohesive feeling like that, which I think is really helpful and really important. If we want to move on to another question, this kind of moves on from the last question, but how do you create a team culture that supports your chairmans and outreach programs?
I think that by kind of like 1678, we do require everyone to have a certain number of outreach hours and attend a certain number of outreach events every year. And just by doing that, every student is involved, even in some tiny way, in outreach, and they develop an appreciation for the outreach work that we do. So even if they can't, like if they don't like writing and they don't want to sit down at a computer for 4 hours every day typing an essay about our team, they understand the work that we're doing. And again, they can talk to judges about it and they have a part of it. So when we win Engineering Inspiration and in the little blurb before the award, the judges say something like, they hosted this many DEX events, that student can sit there and was like, hey, I volunteered at that event. I was a part of this. And just by little things like that, you begin to develop an appreciation for it.
It's a little different on 3132. Oh, go ahead, Jessica.
Sorry, I agree with what Sarah said, and I think a big part of that understanding is respect. They need to respect the work that goes into the chairman's program, and they can't just say, oh, these students, this might not be a problem on a lot of teams, but I know on some teams it is, where the robotics team kind of doesn't take the chairman's sub-team seriously because they think it's just a bunch of essay writing and those kids don't work on the robot anyway. They need to realize that it is actually a big deal and it is something that needs an equal amount of effort going into it.
So I'm going to champion this one for all the rookies out there. It's really hard to change culture, right? It's really, really hard if you don't start there. And 3132 is in the unique position of we had to care about chairmans, and not for the award, but because when we started, we were the only FRC team on the continent, and there were only 20 FLL teams. That is not sustainable. Like, we didn't have a sponsor base, we didn't have a stream of students coming in, that none of that existed. So simply to ensure our own survival, we had to start looking at all the things that, as it turns out, feed directly into things like the Chairman's Award and Engineering Inspiration and entrepreneurship. And so I think that if you're a rookie, you have an amazing opportunity to not have to have this conversation and to not worry about this, because you can just do it from the very beginning. I know one of the things that was really important for us was our mission statement. And if you talk to 1816, or if you go and watch some of the presentations they've done, I know mission statement was also crucial for them in their journey to the Hall of Fame. So 3132 is a STEM for everyone, everywhere. And it's always been that. And that's truly what the team is about, is bringing STEM to everyone, be it on our team or be it around the world. So I'd really encourage you to come up with that mission statement and stick to it.
Awesome. I think we're going to move on to taking a few questions from the chat. So if you're watching right now and you have any questions you'd like to ask our panelists, please put them in the chat. I see a few in there already. So from Elijah, do you think it's a better idea to have everyone in the team work on the essay, or do you feel a select group should only be able to work on it?
I think we sort of covered this earlier, but I think the general consensus is that everyone should read the essay and maybe everyone should edit the essay, but only a select group of people should write the essay. Otherwise, it does sound like 30 people have written this essay, and it's not one cohesive voice. I think was the general consensus.
Yeah, also kind of a case of like too many cooks in the kitchen. I think it's hard to get an undertaking like that's done if you're doing it in a bunch of tiny little chunks with a bunch of different people doing each of those chunks. So I think kind of to like streamline the process a little bit, it's probably best to have fewer people working on it. Another question from Shoshana. What are your thoughts on having your presentation reflect the theme of this year's game?
I love it so much. I think that dressing up as astronauts or like Mario characters may be a little bit much, but we typically on our team go for a more formal presentation, but we put in like space puns or Star Wars puns or like video games puns throughout the thing to try to keep it light and a little bit funny. And it just makes you more excited every time you like say that pun. You're like, oh, this is funny. And it's just something to lighten it up a little bit.
I think this really depends on your team and what you're comfortable with. Like for some, there are teams that, just looking in the Hall of Fame group, right? Mars always would get dressed up in like suits. I know other teams in the Hall of Fame that have done skits, like 27. Our team fell somewhere in the middle of those, I think. We would go in just team shirts and talk. And we weren't really doing a theme. Our theme was STEM for everyone, everywhere, which is also a mission statement. So that was what we were trying to thread through it. But I know a lot of teams have been really successful by having a more fun theme like that game, or I don't know. There's lots of examples out there that you can look to.
Eric, did you have something?
Yeah, I was worried my mic might have been messed up. So my thought on theme in general for presentation as well as the whole team is, well, first of all, it should be up to the individual team. If it's something you guys really want to do, I'd say absolutely go for it. It's a conversation you should have though, because at least from what I've seen, if you go with branding your team year after year to the year's theme, it becomes hard to have consistent branding and be identifiable. If your pit changes every year to the theme, that's going to be a lot of work and a lot of effort, and that's totally cool. That's something you want to do, but do recognize that there are drop-offs in professionalism and consistency when you do stick to those themes. As far as the presentation in general, I agree with Sarah. I think it's totally cool to throw in, puns, or, have your, if we do like trifold boards or something like that, have those boards be, space themed or whatever. But, try and keep the uniforms what you guys would wear during a normal year. And, the presentation should be about your team, not about the theme. The theme is just there to help help everyone have fun. It's not what the robotics is about. So, don't get caught up on it. Totally have fun with it.
I'd like to jump in on this subject. I am completely down for integrating the theme into your presentation. I think it's a really fun way to bring energy into the room, which is something we talked about earlier. However, I do think there's a danger in overdoing it. So definitely keep in mind that the theme, if you are adding a theme, it's not your entire presentation. Like Eric said, that should be focused on your team and your programs. The theme should be used if it can enhance your presentation. So an example would be our presentation last year. We had it space themed. Each of our programs was like a little space station on a planet that represented our team, and we had a cool graphic at the very end where all of the teams that we had helped out looked like stars in the background, which made a really big impact as a kind of big punch closing statement. And it's an example of something that really enhanced the presentation and did not in any way completely overtake the message of the presentation. So that's one example of how you could use the theme.
Yeah, I've also seen in 2019, I know there was the like Star Wars Force for Change initiative thing. And I saw a few teams, actually including our team, kind of integrate that into their submission and talk about it as something that like, oh, this is like what First is pushing right now. So maybe we'll try to incorporate that. So we like incorporated the phrase like being a force for change in a bunch of different places throughout our presentation. So maybe if you like look a little deeper just from like the surface level like aesthetics of the theme and see like what something you can do kind of a little bit deeper with the theme, I think would be another interesting way to incorporate that. It doesn't look like we have any more questions from the chat. And so I think it is about time for us to wrap up. Thank you to all of our wonderful panelists. You guys brought some really great perspectives. We really enjoyed this. Thank you to everyone who was watching. Thank you to the people who sent in questions. This was a really great panel. It was lovely seeing you all. Thank you for being here.